These investments are not handouts. They are mutually beneficial investments in the shared future of this country.
Tonight, a new report says investing in First Nations infrastructure will benefit the entire country.
To think about having affordable housing so it'll be stress-free.
The Roseau River Anishinaabe First Nation is getting a federal boost to build more affordable housing in Winnipeg.
Understanding the work we're doing with Indigenous tourism and how we need to prepare future leaders.
And a new initiative in Halifax hopes to get more Indigenous people involved in the tourism industry. Tansei, good evening. I'm Kitcisakik. Welcome to APTN National News. Thank you for joining us. The Assembly of First Nations and the Conference Board of Canada have released a new report this week. It says investments to close the First Nations infrastructure gap will result in positive economic growth for the whole country. At a press conference in Ottawa, the AFN called on the federal government to invest $350 billion to close the infrastructure gap on First Nations by 2030. The report says this will result in a $635 billion increase in economic output and create up to 338,000 jobs. It also says the investment would generate $87 billion in tax revenue over the next 7 years. Chief Lance Heyman of the Kaboek First Nation spoke about the report and how important Canada's investment would be.
These investments are not handouts. They are mutually beneficial investments in the shared future of this country. They are investments that will drive growth, innovation, and stability for generations to come, and more importantly, build the infrastructure that our communities so desperately need.
Last week, APTN reported on the Alberta Child Advocate reports showing a continuation of Indigenous youth being overrepresented in the child welfare system. As APTN's Chris Seward tells us, an associate professor says more needs to be done to lower the alarming numbers.
The numbers on last week's Alberta Child Advocates reports are not good. Despite only being under 8% of the population, 61% of youth working with the Alberta Child Advocates Office are Indigenous. These numbers have been high for decades. Audra Foggin is the Assistant Professor of Child Studies and Social Work at Mount Royal University. She is Cree and a 60s Scoop survivor. She says the Alberta government needs to listen to Indigenous communities to make a change.
Taking the lead from Indigenous people, community, elders, experts, I think all of the answers that are necessary for improvement are definitely in the community, and I think we're simply not seeing that at this point.
The advocate wants the government to follow a previous recommendation of giving full supports to Indigenous communities across Alberta to have their own systems and take back their children from care. Foggin says this needs to be implemented.
Having Indigenous communities be at the helm and in the lead of their own process, of their own sovereignty, healing, reunification, family prevention is critical to reducing the numbers of Indigenous children in care.
Foggin believes the recommendations from the Child Advocate don't go far enough. They should be binding, not just recommendations.
We know that the Canadian government and that child welfare has never been a good parent. We have to seek other solutions, and I think having more teeth or more legalities implemented rather than just recommendations is a really important step.
The Alberta Children and Family Services Department sent a statement to APTN on their reaction to the Child Advocates report. It reads in part, "These findings continue to inform changes that are helping stabilize the child intervention system. This includes focusing on prevention and early intervention initiatives, including ensuring Indigenous children and youth benefit from culturally appropriate services." It goes on to say, all recommendations made by the OCYA are actioned in a way that will make a positive difference for children, youth, and families. Prior to this report, Children and Family Services has implemented 105 of the 111 recommendations from the OCYA, and 5 remain in progress. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Earlier this year, Victoria Gold's Eagle Gold Mine, located on the traditional territory of the First Nation of Nacho-Nayakdun, experienced a heap leach failure. That failure released cyanide into the surrounding environment. While work is ongoing to clean up the site, the mine's receiver is now asking the Yukon Water Board to temporarily relax its water license. Sarah Connors has more about the receiver's request and the rationale behind it.
In a submission to the Yukon Water Board earlier this month, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Eagle Gold Mine's receiver, says there's a large amount of cyanide-contaminated water on site, and it's mixing with non-contaminated contact water. That mixture is increasing the risk of an uncontrolled discharge of water. PricewaterhouseCoopers says the mine's current water treatment processes can't separate the contaminated and non-contaminated water, nor can it treat the cyanide-impacted water to effluent quality standards identified in the mine's water license. But the water license stipulates water cannot be discharged from the site if effluent standards aren't met. PricewaterhouseCoopers has requested an emergency amendment to its license to temporarily authorize the discharge of partially treated contaminated water into a nearby creek that doesn't meet effluent standards. Its hope is to reduce the volume of water that needs to be stored on site and minimize the potential uncontrolled release of untreated cyanide water. Nacho-Nayakdun Chief Donna Hope said in a submission to the board she understood why the discharge of non-compliant effluent is necessary. However, she said the need for it in the first place is not acceptable to her nation. She provided some recommendations to the board for the amended license, like increased monitoring and sharing data. The board has tentatively scheduled a special sitting with PricewaterhouseCoopers to consider its request on Tuesday. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
2024 has been a difficult year for the Quebec Anishinaabe community of Kitcisakik First Nation. Political struggles and the fires that destroyed the Band Council office and the only dispensary in the area have all contributed to more hardship. Now tensions continue to rise. Last week, a new blockade emerged in response to the Band Council ignoring a request about education. Kim Sullivan has the story.
Barriers and protests against the chief and council have been significant events in Kitcisakik over the past year. The most recent blockade was led by 2 employees of the Kitcisakik Primary School. They are upset with working conditions there after nearly a third of the staff left, either through resignation or preventive sick leave. For example, the school has been without a principal for over a month.
Comme maman, les services éducatifs en ce moment, je sens que ça va être à risque avec tous les départs. Puis, si je me lève en ce moment, c'est vraiment pour montrer mes inquiétudes, pas juste à court terme, mais aussi à long terme des services éducatifs qu'il y a ici à Kitcisakik.
The demands are simple. They want a chance to be heard.
Dans le fond, ce qu'on demande, c'est une assemblée générale pour faire preuve de transparence auprès de, non seulement des employés qui travaillent là, mais aussi de la communauté. Il y a des choses qui se passent, puis je pense que c'est important de venir s'asseoir puis d'écouter.
Les choses n'avancent pas. Il faut le dénoncer pour que ça avance. Il faut parler, puis c'est quelque chose que moi, personnellement, ça m'effraie. Mais je le fais pareil pour l'avenir.
Several former community leaders support the blockade, including former chief Adrienne Anishinaabe. She fears the future of the educational system is heading back towards past horrors.
C'est 2 personnes qui de l'éducation qui ont décidé de diriger le barrage, puis ça c'est eux parce qu'ils autres voient très clair qu'est-ce qui se passe dans l'école puis tout ça. Puis on ne cachera pas qu'il y a quand même eu des jeunes adultes qui sont aujourd'hui adultes dénoncés d'avoir vécu des sévices dans l'école. Puis que cette même façon de gérer refait surface. Moi, non, je ne serai jamais d'accord avec une façon comme ça. C'est un peu comme l'ère du pensionnat qui revient.
The Band Council was not ready to discuss the issue with APTN News, but supporters of Chief Régis Penosway are openly frustrated by the setup of another blockade.
Y a-t-il une loi qui peut empêcher maintenant de faire des barrages puis de priver les enfants d'école puis de priver l'autobus scolaire puis les profs de rentrer? Moi, j'en ai marre de tout ça.
Kevin Papatsi, an active member of the community, blames family quarrels for what's happening. He also believes the blockaders are trying to stop by-elections for vice chief and councillor.
En ce moment, là, c'est des chicanes familiales qu'on voit. C'est beaucoup la chicane familiale. On trouve ça dommage. Nous autres, de notre bord, ceux qui supportent les conseils, on n'a jamais rien dit jusqu'à date. On n'a jamais fait de barricade. On n'a jamais respecté après cette gang-là. Aujourd'hui, là, ce qu'on veut, là, c'est régler la situation.
No one APTN News spoke to was able to confirm what these by-elections are for. The protesters simply want a chief who listens.
Moi, j'ai jamais vu dans une communauté là, un chef aussi comme ça dans la vie de sa communauté. Il a oublié qui l'a élu. 47 personnes qui ont élu cette personne-là. Est-ce que les 47 aujourd'hui vivent une fierté de voir le chef comme ça? Pas sûr.
The barrier was lifted later that same day. Kim Sullivan, APTN National News, Kitcisakik.
More affordable housing in Winnipeg is on the way. We'll tell you who is behind the future project when we come back in about 3 minutes. Welcome back. Another First Nation in Manitoba is getting a boost to own its own apartment block in the city of Winnipeg through the federal government's National Housing Strategy and the Affordable Housing Fund. Once completed, the Roseau River Anishinaabe First Nation hopes to use the building for those furthering their education. With more, here's T.R. Wheatley.
A symbolic sod turning where a $38.5 million 7-story building owned by the Roseau River Anishinaabe First Nation will soon be. 38 of the 95 units will be subsidized below 70% of the market, with construction expected to take another 10 months. The community's trust fund investing $3.5 million into the project to help advance education opportunities for its members. Josephine Harden is on the trust committee and vice principal of Roseau River's Canoe School.
To think about having affordable housing, so it'll be stress-free, so you can just focus on just going to school.
The feds and CMHC under the Affordable Housing Fund will cover $32.2 million. An additional $2.8 million in tax rebates from the city of Winnipeg will also go towards construction. Terry Dogood, MP for Winnipeg South, said the fund is meant to help seniors, people experiencing homelessness, women fleeing violence, and Indigenous peoples.
Under our national housing strategy, we have distinction-based allotments for First Nations, for Métis, and for Inuit. So these partnerships are happening across the country.
Here in Manitoba, this is the second apartment owned by a First Nation under this strategy. Nigel Fergus is the CEO of Paragon Living and partner in both projects.
We share our expertise. We're the partner. We deal with the finance, the construction, the design, and the management of the project, also the lease-up, marketing, and branding. And we basically turn over a fully leased asset over to the First Nation as 100% ownership.
In the city's core, this building owned by Opaskwayak Cree Nation was announced in 2023. Tenants are expected to move in by May 2025, and like Roseau River, they focus on housing their members, furthering their education. Fergus says Paragon has already started working with a third First Nation.
Shoal Lake 40 project, we just got the Housing Accelerator Fund grant announced, and we are continuing to work through it. It's located in the St. James neighborhood, and we're also in for a CMHC application.
Whelan Sutherland helped broker the deal with Paragon and Opaskwayak, getting the idea from his own personal experience.
Way back in the day, in the early 2000s, it was really difficult for us to find a place to live. I had a family, I had kids.
Once he completed his Bachelor of Commerce degree, he began his career in helping First Nations with business opportunities.
From that point, I've always tried to position our First Nations to recognize the importance of ownership, owning products and services that they provide to themselves.
Immeasurable investments, he says, in both generational wealth and growth. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A group of Mohawk activists from Kitcisakik planted a white pine on McGill University's campus in downtown Montreal last Sunday. They say it was planted to commemorate the McGill-Gaza Solidarity Encampment, which was dismantled by McGill last July. The pine was removed by the university less than 24 hours after it was planted. The Great White Pine is a symbol of peace for the Haudenosaunee nations, and it was planted to counter the violence happening in Palestine. McGill University said in a statement that it was notified of the planting of the tree and that it had removed it. In response to allegations of not following reconciliation, McGill said their grounds team decides which trees are planted on campus. The Mohawk group says this goes against reconciliation efforts the university says it's committed to.
We wanted McGill to join in the peace planting the tree, and we were hoping that they would embrace it, since their land acknowledgement on their website states that they're for truth, they're for the accountability, they're for reconciliation. But their responses were negative, and it sort of contradicts their land acknowledgement and their purported respect for Indigenous peoples' human rights.
There is a new initiative in Halifax looking to boost Indigenous tourism. Our Angel Moore is up next with that story after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Today's picture comes to you from Karen Sear in Burns Lake, British Columbia. Karen says now that the fledglings are gone, the parent ravens have time for a social life. Thanks for sharing, Karen. Karen, those ravens are looking ever majestic. To have your picture featured on the next photo of the day, it's super simple. All you have to do is send us a picture and a short description to share at aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east, St. John's rain in 4, Charlottetown rain in 7. The Grand River 2, Nain 2. Gaspé 6, Saguenay 3. Partly cloudy in London at 3, Toronto 4. -3 in Timmins, -6 in Sioux Lookout. -10 in Churchill, Puckatawagan -9. Snowy in Winnipeg at -6, Gimli -5. -22 in Regina, -16 in Saskatoon. -21 in Meadow Lake, Stony Rapids -14. Rain in Fort Chipewyan at -13, Peace River, partly cloudy and -21. -11 in Red Deer, sun in Edmonton at -14. 4 in Campbell River, -1 in Kamloops. Sandspit 5, Prince Rupert 7. Old Crow -33 in sun, Mayo -18. Wati -27, Yellowknife -26. Sax Harbor -23, Fort McPherson -29. -23 in Baker Lake, Cambridge Bay -21. And Resolute -24, Clyde River -15. Indigenous tourism is getting a boost in the Atlantic region. As the need for more authentic Indigenous knowledge in the tourism industry grows, there is now a new program at a university in Halifax. The program will include post-secondary Indigenous students who see themselves one day sharing their culture through tourism. APTN's Angel Moore brings us the story.
Are in the lobby of Mount St. Vincent University, where the Ginu Tourism Project celebrates the launch of Indigenous student cohort, developed to increase Indigenous involvement in tourism. Karen Beals is a member of the Glooscap First Nation. She registered in the program. Quilling for over 10 years, Beals says Mi'kmaq history is in her designs.
I want to be able to have the right information and the right stories to be able to tell the people who buy my quill work and where it all began, and just informing the right information. I believe we're all ambassadors of our culture, so unless we know it then I want to be able to give the public the right information.
Robert Bernard is the Ginu executive and Mi'kma'ki advisory member. He says there's a shortage of authentic Indigenous knowledge in tourism.
We weren't seeing it in the tourism industry. That change takes place really slow. So thinking about the long term, we said how best to change this would be to start working and partnering with the education systems.
The Ginu Tourism Project was developed with input from Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey communities. Ginu is Mi'kmaq for together. The project integrates Indigenous knowledge into MSVU's Tourism and Hospitality program. Joelle Dickinson is the president of MSVU and says the program has helped build relationships with Indigenous communities.
I do hope that other universities see how it's been done and grow areas that their expertise is in. We happen to have great expertise in tourism, and so we were able to help community because of that. And I hope other universities embrace the way that we're doing this and invest even more in community.
The project began last September. Students learn from Indigenous professionals who are in the tourism and hospitality sector, such as Mi'kmaq basket maker and a Cree chef who prepares traditional foods. Student Gabriel Robitaille is a singer and a drummer. He is passionate about his people's culture, art, and music.
It's not a belief they have, it's a conviction, it's a purpose, and you can really see how they give back to the communities, and it's something that really just fires me up and gets me going.
Student Davina Bernard wants to learn more about Mi'kmaq culture and hopes to work in Indigenous tourism.
Like I was saying earlier, it was great to know that we're all kind of our own knowledge keepers, and it's good on a personal level to meet with other individuals and kind of share and learn off of each other.
Robert Bernard says with the rise of Indigenous tourism, the program will help sustain the industry.
This is more leadership development for students that we see graduating from the program, understanding the work we're doing with Indigenous tourism and how we need to prepare future leaders.
According to the Atlantic Indigenous Tourism Report released last year, the sector has opened up almost 3,000 jobs and is expected to grow. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabuktuk, also known as Halifax.
Cree filmmaker Neil Diamond has had a busy year. The Peabody Award winner has released 2 documentaries in 2024, Red Fever and the more recent So Surreal Behind the Masks. The film is about the impact of ceremonial masks on surrealist artists and the quest to bring them home. On tonight's Face to Face with Dennis Ward, Diamond tells us about the different ways the two cultures use the masks.
Once the Yupik had their ceremonies, they would either leave them on the tundra or burn them, and so the power that resided in the masks wouldn't stay on this side of the of existence. And the Kwakwaka'wakw, they would use them to tell their family history at potlatches and give away their belongings, and they would store them away from people's eyes. And now, all these masks, they're all on display.
And that is your evening newscast for this Tuesday, November 26th. We'll be back again tomorrow for your daytime newscast. Make sure to join us then. From everyone at APTN National News and from our reporting staff from across the country, Masicho, Miigwech, hi, thank you for watching, and we'll see you again. Ekse.